Hi there, my name is Christopher Graham and I want to talk to you a little bit about English language teaching and climate change, and particularly how COVID has somewhat changed our circumstances. I've been working in English language teaching, ELT, for a long time now, more than 30 years, and it's been interesting in the last couple of years how we've been gaining an increasing understanding and appreciation of the environmental impact of our community and its activities, and the formation of ELT footprints that many people here will know about, which I'm very proud to be one of the co-founders, has been an important step, I think, about 18 months ago. And as I say, there's a growing awareness of our contribution, if that's the correct word, to climate change. And certainly discussions were moving very interesting directions within Footprint and beyond Footprint in terms of not only what we can do in terms of changing our behaviours, but also what we can do in terms of what we teach in the climate change context. And then, of course, something called COVID came along and everything changed rather quickly. English language teaching does contribute to climate change. Perhaps people from outside our community may be a little surprised if you say to someone English teaching has any connection with climate change. They might be a little, as I say, a little surprised to understand that. We have a lot of single paper use, books, photocopies of worksheets and activities which we all enjoy making that probably get used once and then sadly thrown away. Schools, of course, use electricity, gas and water in their cooling and their heating. Increasingly, we have an understanding that technology, the big servers, are contributors towards climate change, and I think all thought, well, if we move from paper to digital, that will help to solve the problem. And many of us have gone from paper to digital thanks to COVID, but sometimes you feel you can't win, but it is a point and an area that's being much researched at the moment, that the big servers do have an environmental impact. And of course, we enjoy our international conferences as well, which involve flying, the impact of flying, and also the result of the large conference centres as well, which have quite a large environmental footprint too. So we are contributors to climate change. And of course, I would also argue that it's not just our behaviours, but what we teach. The people are called below it the jet set. Sounds a rather 1960s term, but there we are. Examples in course books of highly successful people jetting around the world, staying in expensive hotels and having very high-powered jobs. These themes in English language course books are beginning to feel rather dated. They're not representative of the societies and the communities that we teach to, and certainly they are not exemplars of good environmental practice. So I think we all who are involved in writing and publishing perhaps need to revisit these themes and these characters just a little bit. But we can, of course, make a positive impact immediately in several ways. One is by, in inverted commas, greening our schools in terms of the consumption, the way we use paper, some of the areas that I've spoken about. I'm going to say no more about greening schools because Jonathan Dykes will be speaking about that later today. English language teaching, the community is really quite something. The British Council produced some figures, I think about a year ago, saying that they estimate there's 1.5 billion, not million, billion people learning English at any one time in the world. That's a phenomenally large community, isn't it? And through that, we can make an impact on the climate discussion and therefore on climate change itself. Certainly by what we teach, I would like to see more climate change topics, examples of good practice, being introduced into our course books. It's for many years now, course books have had a chapter on the environment, but I would like to see things interwoven all the way through books, and the default to be a green option, a green way of doing things, rather than just one unit. So I think a revisiting, again, as I mentioned before, course materials is important. But I think also the how, not just the what. I'm interested in schools that are doing an activity, a project-based learning activity, perhaps to make a poster around plastic waste on beaches. And those schools where the teacher is taking the students out to the beach and they're picking up plastic, maybe having a competition who can pick up the most pieces of plastic in half an hour or something. That's not only is there an environmental impact there, an environmental education impact, that's real English teaching. That's students using the language to make their contribution towards a particular problem. So let's look at more of those kinds of out of classroom or classroom and real world linked projects, I think. We do unfortunately have an elephant in the room, as do many communities, and our elephant in the ELT room is study abroad. Students flying, largely flying overseas to study to study English. A few statistics: the UK in a typical year, 2019, the last one for pre-COVID, over 500,000 students came to the UK alone to study English. Staying European students just over 2 weeks, longer distance students, non-EU students, typically just under 5.5 weeks. Those statistics float around, maybe not meaning very much, but I calculated that if everybody flies, which they don't, some of course will get a train, so it's not quite as bad as I suggest here, and assuming everybody goes home, that's 6,700 Airbus A320s a year full of EFL students. You can imagine 6,500 aircraft lined up. That's what it looks like. It is making a contribution to the climate emergency. We can't dodge this one. Because there's a massive dilemma. Lots of money comes into our community, £1.5 billion almost every year, 35,000 jobs, not just teachers, not just schools, but bars, restaurants, nightclubs, social attractions, taxi drivers, host families, all these people that are part of the community around ELT. There is no doubt jobs are being lost or will be lost because of COVID. And that's what I want to explore now. Jobs are being lost because study abroad is collapsing. Schools are closing. People are reluctant to come to the UK, reluctant to go to Australia. They can't come because of quarantine and other rules. Teaching institutions in non-English medium countries are also closing because families don't want to send their children or their teenagers to study in a closed environment, especially when online options are coming. And of course, teaching online can have severe financial implications for language schools. Educational publishers are struggling too, because not so many people studying English mean not so many books are being bought. It is having a very significant effect on our community, the whole COVID thing. So what I want to think about is ways of making the best of what COVID has given us. My working assumption is we have to re-engineer, we have to survive, we have to keep our industry going. But COVID has given us, by requiring us to re-engineer, COVID has given us an opportunity to keep green issues, green topics at the forefront of our planning, at the forefront of our re-engineering as we try to move forwards from this mess that COVID has given us. And I love the quote there from Kurt Vonnegut: we have to continue to be jumping off cliffs and developing our wings on the way down. Any English teacher who has gone from a classroom in February or March to working online in April will have sympathy with that. We've all had to learn fast. We've all had to be flexible. We've had to innovate, and we've had to be resilient and tough. It's been a difficult time for all of us, a very challenging time for all of us. And I have to say, speaking to a lot of people in the community, I think we're doing a really good job. It's not perfect. It was never going to be perfect. But we are now beginning to come to terms with online delivery. And many of us, including me, have had a fairly steep learning curve. But as I say, ongoing, the re-engineering of our community and what we do and how we do it, I think has to have a firm green agenda at the forefront. Conferences. I would like to see more local or regional conferences, less flying, less traveling. Of course, we need specialist speakers, guest speakers from wherever in the world. We're now competent users of Zoom or Teams. We can do that. It's much more widely accepted. I think we need to champion conferences that are becoming green, that are producing green credentials and sticking to them. I think in non-English medium countries, institutions are already developing hybrid solutions, blended learning solutions, because they've had to socially distance. They can't have a class of 20 or 25 students anymore because they're only allowed to have 7 in the room or whatever it is, depending on the size of the room. So students are going in 1 day a week instead of 3 days a week. Of course, there's an environmental benefit of that. Fewer journeys by car or by bus or whatever, less consumption, lower consumption rates. There are benefits. It's a steep learning curve and schools are going through it. But in my opinion, once they've gone through it, there will be no going back. And that does give us an environmental benefit. Study abroad. People will always want to study abroad. What I'm suggesting is we need to be a little bit more academically strategic about study abroad. Do we really need people to go? Is that what this student will benefit from? I realize that this will not be music to the ears of study abroad providers, but I do think we need to be a little bit discriminating about which students will benefit most, because there is no doubt we need to do something about these, in the case of the UK, 6,000 Airbus 320s every year. Study abroad has increasingly perhaps been linked to tourism, and I think tourism, international tourism, will reduce, and I think international study abroad with a large tourism element will need to reduce in parallel with that. I think longer stays, which will be music to institutions around the world, of course help to mitigate the effect of the flights. If somebody stays in an institution for 10 weeks instead of 2 weeks, then the impact of the flight is reduced significantly because they're staying longer. And I think particularly within Europe, but maybe in other areas as well, we need to look at train travel and other ways of traveling. Europe now has many more long distance overnight international trains than there were even a year ago, thanks to COVID and to certain European governments being very strong on the climate emergency. So we need to make use of that to get our students traveling on trains. And I think we also have to look at study abroad and accept that synchronous and asynchronous online delivery is going to be the norm. As I said before, we're getting better at it. Students are getting more used to it. It is becoming the orthodoxy. We've all still got a lot to learn, but schools will have to adapt and have to react and innovate around it. And I think we will see more local in-student country provision, summer camps, camps by the beach, camps in the mountains, students who would traditionally perhaps have gone to the UK or Australia or the United States staying at home. But international partnerships can enhance that local provision. The cultural side, the cultural benefits of traveling to the US, Australia, the UK, or wherever, can be reproduced to a certain degree virtually. Guest speakers, international teachers from different countries joining these communities. We can make these schools, summer camps, whatever you want to call them, very rich processes, very rich experiences. It'll just be different from what we've been used to. And I'm not suggesting, I'm certainly not advocating shutting down language schools. I'm not saying study abroad shouldn't happen. What I'm really saying is we have been given this opportunity by the great, in many cases, tragedy of COVID. Let's make the best of it. Let's rebuild our community from the COVID mess in as green a way as possible. And my call to action there is largely environmental, but also while we're at it, let's look at one or two other areas of the way that we work as a community and the way that we interact with each other. Out of the embers, out of the fire, whatever the cliche is, there's always something to be reconstructed. While we're re-engineering, while we're reconstructing, let's do it well. It's a tall order, but it is in our hands. It's up to us now to make sure we do it in the most environmentally friendly way that we can. Thank you for your time.